Welcome back, you night owls. Tonight we slip through the gilded corridors of a palace that smells faintly of beeswax and secrets, where the moonlight is sharp enough to cut through silk curtains. You can almost feel the cool marble under your bare feet as you creep forward, holding your breath. This isn't a fairy tale lullaby. This is the story of the royal baby swap no one dared to talk about, the kind of tale that makes even historians shift in their chairs. And just so you know, you probably won't survive this without at least one raised eyebrow at how far people went to keep a crown shiny. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're listening from a quiet bedroom, a train bunk, or even your office chair at 3 AM, post your location and your local time in the comments. I love seeing where these late night journeys take you. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You inch past a tapestry of St. George slaying a dragon, the threads glinting like tiny stars in the cold glow. Beyond the archway lies the palace nursery, a place you'd think would smell of milk and lavender, but tonight smells faintly of iron, the way the air does before a storm. A cradle rocks ever so slightly, though no one is touching it. A nursemaid stands stiff as a candle, knuckles white as she clutches the crib's edge. Somewhere far off, a bell tolls the hour, midnight, and you sense that something irreversible just happened. You crouch lower, peering into the cradle's shadow. The baby is quiet, too quiet. Your pulse thuds in your ears, and for a moment you think the infant might not even be breathing. Then a tiny movement. A fist uncurls, the kind of soft fist that could never know the weight of a crown, and you feel both relief and dread. Because something about the child's hair, so dark, so unlike the family portraits that line the hall, sets a whisper loose in the back of your mind. The whisper is exactly what you hear next, coming from behind a column. The wet nurse is muttering to herself, a prayer maybe, though her voice shakes like she's repeating a confession. You catch a phrase, something about God forgive the switch, and your stomach drops. You've read enough history to know that medieval courts loved a little intrigue, but this is not the kind of thing anyone jokes about. Switching babies is not just gossip column scandal, it's succession war material. You slip further into the shadows as a steward passes by, carrying a lantern that throws dancing shapes across the floor. The steward doesn't even glance at the cradle. He walks straight to the writing desk, scribbles something onto a parchment and leaves. His wax seal is still warm when you dare to peek at it. You can just make out the words heir apparent in the heading. Your throat tightens. The baby in that cradle has just been declared the future ruler, and no one outside this room knows whether the declaration is honest or fabricated. It wouldn't be the first time a court covered up an inconvenient truth. Historians often point to the case of Edward VI's sudden illness in Tudor England, when rumours swirled that the young king had died days earlier than reported. In those days, the timing of a birth or a death could move armies, rearrange treaties, even start wars. Tonight, as you stand in that hushed room, you realise the stakes are just as high here. But this palace has its own flavour of secrecy. There's an old superstition about this dynasty, that no firstborn son ever survives his first winter unless some ritual is performed under a waning moon. It's the kind of story that court musicians weave into ballads, something you'd laugh off, until you notice the brass basin in the corner still slick with milk, honey, and a single feather floating on the surface. Someone has already performed a rite, perhaps a pagan one, and you get the uneasy sense it was meant to cheat fate itself. From the hallway comes a faint creak. The Queen's favourite hound is padding toward the nursery. You watch its ears prick, its nose twitch. Animals know when something's amiss, don't they? The dog gives a low whine, circles the cradle once, then lies down with its back to the child. That gesture feels symbolic, almost like disapproval. Your heart leaps when you hear footsteps behind you, heavier this time. The king's brother, tall and severe, steps into the room. His gaze sweeps over everything. The nursemaid, the cradle, the abandoned basin. His jaw clenches, but he says nothing. He just places a gloved hand on the baby's chest, feels for a heartbeat, and then leaves as quietly as he came. You wonder if he already suspects. You wonder if he'll tell anyone, or keep the secret as leverage for some future power play. You step back to the window, needing air, and the cold rush hits your face. The gardens outside are silvery in the moonlight, eerily empty. Somewhere an owl calls, and the sound seems to echo through the entire palace. Your reflection in the glass looks pale, wide-eyed, like you've just witnessed a crime, and maybe you have. As you leave the nursery, you notice one more detail: the birth register on a nearby lectern. The ink is still wet. 2 names have been written, then one hastily blotted out. You can smell the iron gall ink, sharp and acrid, almost covering the smell of candle smoke. Whoever made the change didn't even wait for the page to dry. That, more than anything, tells you the decision was rushed, panic-driven. The corridor seems longer now as you retrace your steps. Every portrait of past kings looks like it's following you with accusing eyes. You half expect one to lean forward and hiss, "You saw nothing tonight." And really, what could you do with what you've seen? Tell the court. They'd brand you a liar, or worse. Tell the townsfolk. They'd riot before dawn. For now, you keep it to yourself, but the secret presses on your chest like a stone. Somewhere deep down, you sense this won't stay hidden forever. Secrets this big have a way of leaking out, even if it takes decades. For now, you slip back to your chamber, draw the curtains tight, and try to slow your breathing. But as you lie awake, you hear faint footsteps again, pacing the hallway, stopping outside the nursery, then moving on. Others are awake tonight. Others heard the same whispers, and sooner or later, those whispers will become shouts. You fall into a half-sleep just before dawn, the kind where dreams feel too vivid. In yours, the cradle is empty, swinging wildly, and a crown rolls across the floor, stopping at your feet. When you jolt awake, your first thought is that the baby has been taken again. But the palace is quiet. The bells are tolling for morning prayer, and no alarm has been raised. It almost makes you doubt what you saw. Almost. But when you next pass the nursery later that day, the nursemaid is gone. No explanation, no farewell. Just replaced by a stranger with a polite smile, and no knowledge of last night's events. And that, perhaps, is the most chilling thing of all. The way a palace can erase a person as easily as it blots out a name on a page. As you leave, you notice a little bundle on the floor, half hidden under the window seat. It's a child's cap, soft and embroidered with the royal crest. There are 2 initials stitched inside, and neither matches the name you saw in the register. You pocket it before anyone else can see. You wake with that cap still clutched in your hand, its embroidery rough against your palm, as if it wants to remind you it's real. The palace hums with its usual morning noises, pages running errands, bells ringing for chapel, cooks yelling at scullions. But you notice the absence first. The old nursemaid's laugh, the one that usually echoed faintly down the corridor, is gone. When you finally catch sight of the new woman rocking the royal cradle, she avoids your eyes like you're a walking curse. That alone would be enough to raise suspicion. But then there's the whisper of scandal you catch while passing the laundry courtyard. A pair of servants are gossiping near the well, hands cupped to their mouths like sparrows sharing a crumb. One says the dismissed nurse was sent away before sunrise. No carriage, no escort, just gone. The other swears she saw the woman slip a leather-bound diary into her apron pocket before leaving. A diary. That word strikes like flint against stone in your mind. People who leave diaries behind tend to leave trouble in their wake. You decide not to wait. There's a horse waiting in the lower stables, still damp from the morning mist. By mid-morning, you're following the road that leads away from the palace, keeping your hood low. The countryside feels so much larger when you leave the safety of the walls, the air sharper, the smells of manure and wet hay grounding you. You ride until the road forks toward a village known for its tavern and its gossip, because where else would a banished nursemaid run? Inside the tavern, the air smells of beer and smoke, and the floor is sticky under your boots. A bard in the corner strums a lazy tune, one of those songs about kings who go to war and never return, and it makes the hairs rise on the back of your neck. You spot her almost immediately, the nursemaid hunched over a mug, her cap discarded, her hair a wild halo around her face. She looks 10 years older than she did last night. You slide onto the bench across from her. At first she doesn't look up, but then her eyes flick to yours and widen in recognition. She hisses under her breath, "You shouldn't be here." Her hands tremble as she reaches for the diary, as if it might leap from the table on its own. You convince her to talk, softly, quickly, because she says there are ears everywhere. The words tumble out in a rush. There were 2 infants, she says, 2 births in the palace that night, one in the Queen's chamber, one in a hidden room down the hall. The first was a boy, pale and still, who never drew breath. The second was a girl, born to a servant, healthy and strong, and before the candles burned out, the children were swapped. Your heart stutters at the image. A dead prince, a living girl in his place. You almost laugh. It sounds like the setup of a farce, but the nursemaid's face is grave, and you know there's no jest in her voice. The diary she clutches records the entire event. Who gave the order, who carried the infants, who witnessed the exchange. She swears she copied the names carefully, even though her hands were shaking. Outside, a cart rumbles past and she flinches like a hunted animal. "They will come for me," she says. "They always do when someone knows too much." She presses the diary toward you, then snatches it back as though reconsidering. "No, not yet. If I give you this, you'll be marked too." You lean closer, lowering your voice until you're almost whispering into her hair. You remind her that the truth cannot stay hidden forever. That's when she says something that makes your blood run cold. It's not just the throne at stake. It's the prophecy. There it is again, that eerie thread running through this court. She tells you of an old tale passed from midwives to midwives, one that promised a ruler born under the waning moon with the cry of a fox would bring an era of prosperity, or ruin, depending on which verse you believe. The palace astrologers had predicted the royal heir would be born on just such a night, but when the boy was stillborn, panic spread like wildfire. To admit there was no living heir would have meant the prophecy was broken, the dynasty cursed. You picture the court astrologer from last night, the one who burned his charts. Suddenly it makes sense. He wasn't destroying his work out of fear of being wrong, but because being right was worse. Historians still wrestle with stories like these, arguing whether such prophecies ever truly influenced politics or were just excuses invented later. But when you sit there in that smoky tavern, hearing the nursemaid's voice crack, you know she believes every word, and belief in history often matters more than fact. Your mug has gone cold by the time she finally opens the diary and lets you see a single page. The ink is hurried but legible, the names underlined twice. You commit them to memory, your mind already spinning ahead. What if these pages fell into the wrong hands? A foreign envoy could use them to challenge the legitimacy of the crown. A rival noble could stage a coup. The kingdom could dissolve into chaos before winter. The nursemaid shoves the diary back into her apron and tells you to leave first. She'll take another road, disappear for a while, maybe cross the border if she can. You pay for her drink and slip out into the daylight, blinking at how bright it feels after so much shadow. On the way back to the palace, every rider you pass looks suspicious. You half expect a band of guards to appear and block the road, demand to search your cloak. But you make it through the gates without incident, the cap still in your pocket like a hidden talisman. That night, as you lie awake again, you hear faint music drifting up from the great hall. Lute strings, soft laughter. The court is celebrating something, perhaps the miraculous birth of their new heir. You think of the nursemaid alone in the dark, fleeing for her life, and you wonder how many people in this palace are smiling because they must, not because they believe the story they're telling. Sometime after midnight, you hear another sound, the scraping of quills. Someone is writing furiously in the scriptorium, perhaps amending records to make the swap seem as though it never happened. When you peek through the crack in the door, you see 3 clerks bent over parchments, their hands moving in synchronized silence. The scent of hot wax fills the air as seal after seal is pressed. Whatever was true yesterday is being rewritten tonight. Before you leave, your eye catches a piece of parchment discarded near the hearth. It's half burned, but you can make out enough to know it was a decree ordering the burial of the stillborn child. The name on it matches the blotted one you saw in the register. Someone tried to erase this life not once, but twice, on paper and in memory. Back in your chamber, you light a single candle and stare at the cap again. The initials no longer look quaint. They look defiant. You imagine the servant mother whose baby now lies in silk. The tears she must have shed when her arms were left empty. Did she protest? Did she beg? Or did she accept whatever hush money they offered and vanish into the kitchens, never to speak again? Your thoughts spiral as you drift towards sleep. This time the dream is sharper, almost like an omen. The cradle tips over, the baby falls, and instead of crying, the child stands, already crowned, already grown, staring at you with accusing eyes. You wake with sweat on your neck, the candle guttered out, the room smelling faintly of smoke as though your dream had burned something real. By morning, rumours ripple through the servants' hall. The nursemaid has been spotted on the border road, pursued by riders wearing the king's crest. Some say she was caught, others that she vanished into the woods like a ghost. You can't stop wondering which story is true, and whether the diary is still out there, waiting to surface like a bone after a storm. You barely have time to absorb the nursemaid's revelations before the next twist finds you. The palace is unusually quiet that afternoon, almost drowsy in the haze of late sunlight, when a servant slips you a message rolled tight as a prayer scroll. The wax seal is unmarked, dangerous in itself, but inside is a single line. Meet me by the chapel garden at Vespers. No name, no hint. Just a trembling hand that looks suspiciously like it belongs to someone used to ink stains and birth ledgers. By the time the chapel bells ring, you're already there, leaning against the stone wall that is cool even in summer. The garden smells of rosemary and damp earth, and the shadows stretch long, like fingers reaching toward the door. Out of the dusk comes a figure, the royal midwife herself, her apron still flecked with the herbs she always keeps in her pockets. You've seen her before, bustling through corridors like a gust of wind, but now she moves with the caution of someone expecting to be followed. When she sees you, she hesitates, then pulls you into the shelter of a yew tree. Her voice is low, cracked from nights of weeping. "They'll hang me if they know I told you," she says, "but I can't die with a lie on my soul." Her confession spills out in pieces, each one more shattering than the last. The Queen's labour had been long, too long, and by the time the child was delivered he was blue and silent. "I tried everything," she says, her fingers twisting. Slapped his feet, cleared his lungs, prayed over him. Nothing. The king had not been present. His advisers kept him away until they knew whether they would have to bring condolences or celebrations. The midwife was left alone with the queen's sobs echoing like bells of mourning. Then, she says, came the knock on the secret door. Not just any servant, but one of the queen's closest ladies-in-waiting entered with a bundle in her arms. Inside was a child born just hours earlier to a kitchen maid. A girl, perfect, and screaming. The lady's orders were quiet and absolute. The child must take the dead boy's place. The midwife says she balked at first, refusing to violate nature's decree, but the lady's words chilled her. If we send word there is no heir, the king's brother will seize the throne by nightfall. The queen will be put aside. This child is the only shield she has. You can almost feel the heat of the room as she describes it, the fire roaring in the hearth, the candle wax dripping like tears. She says her hands shook as she swapped the infants, laying the girl in the cradle of state. "I thought it would buy us time," she whispers. "Time to try again, time to pray for another son." But the queen clutched that child to her breast and called her by the prince's name before dawn broke. After that, there was no going back. Her voice hardens as she talks of what came after. The kitchen maid was paid off and sent away, though whether she went willingly or under duress the midwife cannot say. The dead boy was buried quietly in the royal crypt under a false name, and she was sworn to secrecy under pain of death. "Every night I see his little face," she says, staring into the garden soil as though she might find absolution there. Historians still bicker over whether stories like this were exaggerations invented later by political enemies, but standing there in the fading light, you believe her. There's something too raw, too human, about the way she shakes when she speaks. It's the kind of memory that no court chronicler could invent. She takes your hand suddenly, pressing something small and hard into your palm. It's a bead carved of bone, with a tiny cross etched into it. "From the boy's swaddling cord," she says, "I kept it hidden, though I should have buried it with him." It's proof that he lived, and proof that he died. You stare at it, feeling the weight of its meaning. It's not just a relic. It's a key that could unlock the entire scandal if shown to the wrong person. The midwife's eyes are wide, pleading. "You must decide," she says. "Tell the truth, and the queen will fall. Keep silent, and a girl will grow up to rule a kingdom meant for a boy. Or the chapel bells toll again, snapping you out of the moment. The midwife slips away through the side gate, vanishing like smoke. You pocket the bead, though it feels like it burns against your skin. Back inside the palace, everything looks different. The gold-leaf ceilings seem garish, the laughing courtiers like actors in a play whose script you now know too well. At supper, the queen enters with the prince in her arms. cooing softly. Everyone rises, everyone bows, and no one dares to notice the way the child's dark hair gleams in the torchlight. During the meal, you catch a glimpse of the king's brother again, seated at the far end of the table. His gaze never leaves the baby, and for a moment you could swear there's triumph in his eyes, as though he knows exactly what happened and is simply biding his time. You look away before he can catch your stare, but the thought lingers. Perhaps he's waiting for the perfect moment to use this secret like a dagger. After supper, you wander into the gallery, hoping the cool air will clear your head. Instead, you find another puzzle waiting. A painter is at work on the first official portrait of the infant heir, and you see the Queen leaning over his shoulder, insisting he lighten the child's hair and soften the nose. "A little more like the king," she says, and the painter obeys, dabbing away the truth one stroke at a time. You wonder how many future generations will look at that portrait and never suspect the story beneath it. Your mind churns as you lie awake again that night. Outside, the wind picks up, rattling the shutters like impatient fingers. You dream once more, but this time it's not the cradle you see. It's the midwife standing at the foot of your bed, her apron soaked, her hands reaching out. When you wake, the bead is still in your fist, your fingers aching from holding it too tightly. Morning brings no relief. The court is abuzz with preparations for a great Thanksgiving Mass for the safe birth of the prince. The bells ring so often you begin to hate them, each peal sounding like an accusation. You slip into the chapel during the service and sit in the back, the incense so thick it makes your eyes water. The choir sings of divine blessing, of heavenly favour, and you nearly laugh aloud. If this was heaven's plan, it was a twisted one. When the service ends, you linger, watching as the Queen carries the baby to the altar for a blessing. For one heartbeat you think she glances toward you, her eyes dark and knowing. Maybe she guesses what you know. Maybe she knows everything and doesn't care. She kisses the child's head, and the congregation sighs as if witnessing a miracle. You alone feel the weight of the truth pressing on your chest. Outside, storm clouds gather even though the day began clear. You stand in the courtyard as the first drops of rain fall, wondering if the sky itself is trying to wash this secret clean, or warn you of what's coming next. The storm from the previous evening doesn't seem to end so much as slide into the next morning, leaving the sky bruised purple and grey. You wake to a distant rumble that could be thunder or cannons, and for a moment you lie there trying to decide which would be worse. The palace corridors are damp, the rushes underfoot giving off the sharp smell of wet hay, and when you reach the great hall you find half the court gathered in uneasy clusters, whispering. The astrologer's tower, they say, burned during the night. That sends a shiver up your spine. You saw him only days ago, hunched over his charts like a man trying to stitch the heavens back together. Now his tower is a charred shell, the air still smelling of smoke and scorched vellum. You climb the spiral stairs carefully, the stone still warm under your hand until you reach the upper chamber. It's a blackened ruin, charts curled to ash, astrolabes twisted out of shape. Only the great brass armillary sphere survives, standing in the corner like a skeleton of the universe. Kneeling among the ashes, you find something curious. A single parchment spared from the flames, pressed under a fallen beam. The edges are singed, but in the centre is a bold inked symbol, a crescent moon pierced by a sword. No words, no dates, just that stark image. You slip it into your cloak, feeling suddenly like a thief, and back away just as footsteps echo on the stairs. The astrologer himself appears, soot streaking his face, his eyes wild and bloodshot from lack of sleep. For a heartbeat you think he might strike you down for trespassing, but instead he sinks onto a stool and laughs, a harsh, hollow sound that makes the hair rise on your neck. "Let it burn," he says, staring at what's left of his work. "Better the heavens be silent than scream." You coax him to talk, your voice calm, as if soothing a frightened animal. Slowly, between fits of muttering, the story tumbles out. The charts had all predicted disaster if the true heir did not survive. Crops failing, invasions, plagues, the whole medieval grab bag of apocalypse. But there was one chart, he says, one reading that no one dared share with the Queen. It suggested that the second-born, the child now in the cradle, would bring not disaster but an age of iron and fire, forging a kingdom stronger than ever. His hands shake as he rubs soot into his hair. "Do you understand?" he says. If I had spoken, they would have seen her as chosen by fate. But the court fears a girl on the throne. They fear the prophecy as much as they crave it. His voice drops lower. So they made me swear to destroy it. Every chart, every star map, gone, as though the sky itself never promised what it did. You glance again at the parchment with the crescent and sword. It feels less like a symbol of doom now, and more like a warning, or perhaps a promise. Historians still argue whether astrologers truly influenced the decisions of kings or simply reflected what their patrons wanted to hear. But in this tower, looking at the man before you, you see the weight of conscience breaking him like an old wheel. Suddenly there's a pounding on the door below, guards' voices calling for the astrologer. His face goes pale. "They will question me," he says. "They will want to know what I saw, what I burned." He thrusts the unburned parchment back into your hands, his fingers smearing it with soot. "Keep it. If I speak under pressure, they'll think I lied. Better someone outside the court holds the truth. You barely have time to slip down the back stair before the guards storm the tower." From the courtyard below, you watch as they escort the astrologer away, his head bowed but his step still strangely defiant. You know what happens next. Questioning, perhaps a quiet confinement, maybe worse if they think he is dangerous. The rest of the day the palace seems jittery, as if everyone feels the same storm pressing on them. At dinner, you overhear two minor nobles speculating that the fire was no accident. One swears he saw a cloaked figure slipping from the tower just before the blaze. Another claims the astrologer has always been too close to the queen, that perhaps he meant to blackmail her. The queen herself dines in silence, the child beside her, gumming at a piece of sugared bread. The king's brother speaks more than usual, his words sharp as knives, needling at the court's nerves. Questions about omens, about the succession, about the will of heaven. You wonder if he suspects the astrologer has evidence that would confirm his worst fears or his greatest hopes. After the meal, you wander out to the gardens for air. The storm has broken at last, leaving the sky a streaked canvas of stars. You tilt your head back, trying to read them the way the astrologer did. Orion's belt gleams like a row of pearls, the moon a thin hook on the horizon. For a moment you almost believe you can see the future too. A throne room bathed in firelight, a young ruler standing tall while courtiers bow in grudging respect. Your reverie is broken by the sound of hurried footsteps on gravel. You slip behind a hedge just as two courtiers hurry past, whispering. One says the astrologer has been placed under house arrest, forbidden to speak to anyone but the king's council. The other mutters that it won't be enough, that men who know the stars are never truly silent. You stay hidden until they pass, your mind racing. The astrologer's fate feels like a mirror of your own. You too are burdened with knowledge, and sooner or later someone will come to ensure your silence. That night, sleep is fitful. When you finally doze off, you dream of the burnt tower again. This time it isn't empty. The astrologer is there, standing in the middle of the fire, smiling as if the flames don't touch him. In his hands he holds the moon and sword parchment, and when he offers it to you, it glows like molten gold. You wake with a start, the symbol still vivid in your mind. You pull it from your cloak to stare at it again. The crescent seems almost to gleam in the candlelight, though you know that's impossible, and yet you feel steadier holding it, as if the sky itself handed you a thread to follow. The next day you learn that the astrologer has indeed been silenced. No one will say whether by choice or by force. The court moves on as though nothing has happened, but you notice how many faces look toward the nursery when they think no one is watching. It's as if the whole palace is holding its breath, waiting to see whether the stars were right, whether this child will save them or doom them. And you, well, you're no longer sure whether you're merely an observer in this story. With a bone bead in one pocket and a soot-marked parchment in the other, you've become a keeper of truths dangerous enough to topple thrones. You can feel the weight of them pressing on you as you walk through the corridors, past guards who nod politely, past courtiers who smile too much. Every smile feels like a test, every nod like a question. Do you know? Will you speak? At the edge of your hearing, a baby cries, not a loud wail, but a soft, determined sound, as if announcing herself to the world. The court will call her prince, will write her name in gold, but you now hear something else in that cry. A challenge, maybe even a warning. And for the first time you wonder if this child might grow up, not just to sit on the throne, but to rewrite all the rules of who is allowed to wear the crown at all. The palace never truly sleeps, but tonight it feels like it's trying to hold its breath. You slip out of your chamber after midnight, following that gnawing instinct that won't let you rest. The moon has climbed higher, flooding the long gallery with silver light, and every suit of armour looks like it's waiting to come alive. You tread carefully over the flagstones until you reach the tapestry room, one of the oldest chambers in the keep. The air inside smells of dust and mothballs, the kind of stillness that makes you certain no one will find you here. The walls are draped in heavy woven scenes of kings triumphant, queens weeping, saints with their hands raised in blessing or warning. You run your fingers over the threads of one panel showing a coronation, the golden threads dulled by centuries, and you wonder if the artist knew what kind of drama would one day unfold in this very hall. Then you hear voices, low, urgent, almost swallowed by the thick hangings. You freeze, straining to listen. The sound comes from behind the largest tapestry, the one that depicts the founding of the dynasty. Swords raised, banners snapping in an imagined wind. You slip behind it, your hands brushing rough stone, and discover a narrow passage leading to a half-forgotten alcove. The voices grow clearer as you creep forward. 3 figures stand around a table lit by a single stub of candle. Their faces are half in shadow, but you recognise them. One is the king's chancellor, another the captain of the guard, and the third a noble whose estates are so vast they could house an army. All 3 are speaking in tones so tense you could pluck them like harp strings. "Cannot keep this hidden forever," the chancellor is saying. "If the truth gets out, the realm will fracture." "It will fracture faster if we speak of it now," the noble snaps back. "The king's brother has spies everywhere." The moment he learns what we know, he'll rally half the barons to his side. The captain of the guard grunts, shifting his weight. "Then what do you suggest?" "We guard a lie with our lives until the girl grows a beard." There's bitter laughter at that, though no one looks amused. You press yourself against the wall, heart hammering. They know. Not just rumours, not just whispers. These men know about the swap, and they're deciding whether to keep it secret or let the kingdom implode. The chancellor spreads a parchment on the table, the candlelight catching its edges. You catch a glimpse of a family tree drawn in neat ink lines, the name of the stillborn prince crossed out with a heavy stroke. Beneath it, the servant girl's name is written, then blotted, then written again. "You've seen the omens," the chancellor says quietly. "Even the stars said she is meant to rule." The noble shakes his head. "The stars don't swing swords. The people will not follow a queen who was never meant to sit the throne, not when there is a grown man with a royal blood ready to lead them." "Ready to seize power, you mean?" the guard captain mutters. The argument circles on itself, sharp as a hunting hawk. You crouch in the shadows, every nerve alert. Historians love to debate whether these clandestine councils were really as dramatic as later chronicles made them sound. Perhaps the writers added too much candlelight, too much doom. But tonight there's no question. This is treason, or salvation, depending on which side you stand. At one point, the noble slams his fist on the table so hard the candle almost goes out. "If we keep this secret, we may be signing our own death warrants," he hisses. One slip, one whisper to the wrong ear, and we hang for high treason. "And if we speak now," the chancellor asks, "we plunge the kingdom into civil war." Silence falls like a blade. The guard captain looks from one man to the other, then finally says, "Then we keep silent." For now, the decision seems to weigh the air down, make it thicker, harder to breathe. They each take a goblet from the table, dip their fingers in wine, and trace a mark on the wall, some kind of vow, perhaps one too old for the court records. Then they extinguish the candle, plunging the alcove into darkness. You wait until you hear their footsteps recede before you dare move. Your knees protest as you rise, every muscle stiff from crouching so long. You slip back into the tapestry room, your pulse still thudding like war drums. The moonlight feels different now, colder, more dangerous. You pause before the great tapestry again. The woven king stands victorious, the queen kneels, and for one strange moment you think you see the threads shift, as if the queen's head lifts, and her embroidered mouth twists into a knowing smile. You blink, and it's just a trick of the light. When you finally make it back to your chamber, you find a folded scrap of parchment waiting under your door. No seal, no signature, just 4 words. You heard too much. You sit on the edge of your bed, staring at it until the candle burns low. Someone knows you were there. Someone saw you, or at least suspects you. The walls feel closer tonight, the shadows heavier. You tuck the note into your sleeve anyway, because proof is proof, even if it's a threat. The next morning you watch the conspirators in the Great Hall, and it's almost eerie how normal they look. The noble is laughing with a visiting envoy, the chancellor is reading petitions as if nothing could be more routine, and the captain of the guard is drilling recruits in the yard. No one would suspect that these men were one candle flame away from throwing the kingdom into chaos. Later that day, you overhear a servant repeating a strange superstition, that speaking a royal secret aloud summons a ghost from the crypt to listen. It sounds like the kind of tale told to frighten children, but you can't help shivering. After last night, you would almost welcome a ghost if it meant sharing the burden. That evening you wander back to the tapestry room half expecting to find guards waiting. Instead you find only silence, the kind so deep you can hear the soft flutter of a moth's wings. You kneel where the men stood and touch the wall. There are faint smudges where their wine-stained fingers marked their vow, already drying into the stone. You whisper to no one in particular, "I heard you." It feels reckless, but also right. The room seems to breathe around you, as though acknowledging your words. When you leave, you catch sight of yourself in the mirror at the end of the hall. You look different. Older, maybe, or simply more certain. You're no longer just an observer. You're a witness now, and witnesses are rarely safe. The moon follows you back to your chamber, shining like an unblinking eye, and in its light, you feel the full weight of what you've learned. The kingdom hangs not just on who wears the crown, but on who keeps the silence. The day of the banquet dawns with unnerving cheer, as if the sky itself has decided to mock you. Golden light pours through the palace windows, the bells sing out for feast day, and the kitchens have been working since before sunrise to roast, boil and bake everything edible in a 10-mile radius. You can smell the cinnamon and roasted venison long before you reach the Great Hall, but the sweetness catches in your throat instead of making you hungry. By the time you slip inside, the hall has been transformed into a spectacle of power. Trestle tables groaning under the weight of pheasants, pies glistening with lard crust, jugs of spiced wine steaming like cauldrons. The ceiling banners are unfurled, each one a blaze of royal heraldry that dares anyone to question who rules here. The air is thick with heat and ambition. The court has gathered in all its finery, velvet, pearls and smiles so sharp they could cut glass. You slide into a shadowed corner, careful to stay close enough to watch but far enough not to draw attention. From your vantage point you can see the king and queen at the high table, the prince in an ornate cradle beside them, swaddled in cloth of gold. The sight makes the courtiers sigh with devotion, though you notice the king's brother watching the cradle with a gaze as cool as a whetted blade. As the feast begins, the noise swells until it's almost deafening. Laughter, the crack of bones, the scrape of knives, all blending into a roar that should have felt merry but instead hums like a threat. You watch as toasts are made, goblets raised, and yet every time the king's brother speaks, the room dips into a strange, brittle silence. He praises the queen, praises the child, but his words are laced with irony so subtle it might go unnoticed by anyone who doesn't already know the truth. At one point a bard is summoned to perform. He plucks a tune on his lute and begins a ballad about the founding of the realm, full of oaths of loyalty and divine right. The crowd joins in, some pounding the tables, others swaying with drunken pride. But you can't help hearing the lines differently now. Each verse about the rightful heir feels like a private jab, each chorus a dare to anyone hiding a secret. Halfway through the feast, a serving boy stumbles near the high table, spilling wine across the king's brother's boots. The room freezes. The boy falls to his knees, begging forgiveness, and for a terrible second you think the brother might strike him. Instead, he smiles, the kind of slow smile that's worse than anger. He lifts the boy's chin and says, loudly enough for the whole hall to hear, "Careful where you spill blood, boy. This hall has seen enough of that." The words drop like stones into a pond. Conversation resumes, but now it's strained, the laughter too quick, the cheer too brittle. The queen's fingers tighten on the edge of the table until her knuckles are white, and the king drains his goblet without speaking. You can almost see the invisible wires connecting everyone in the room. Who owes loyalty to whom? Who might turn coat if the wind shifts? The food keeps coming. Swans stuffed with spices, gilded sugar sculptures of lions and crowns. But the taste has gone out of the evening. You watch one of the nobles you saw in the tapestry room, his jaw tight as he speaks to the captain of the guard. Whatever their vow was, they are already testing its edges, wondering how long they can keep the secret before someone else forces it into the open. Historians still debate whether these great banquets were meant to reassure the court or to intimidate it, and tonight you see both impulses at work. This is a show of plenty, yes, but also a show of control. Look how fat and content we are, it says. Who would dare topple us? And yet the fear is there, just under the surface, in the way servants keep glancing toward the doors, as though expecting soldiers to march in at any moment. When the final course is brought out, a massive boar's head crowned with rosemary, you notice something strange. The cradle beside the queen is empty. No one remarks on it, not openly, but you see heads tilt, eyes flicker. The new nursemaid, returns minutes later carrying the child as if nothing had happened. The queen smiles thinly and resumes eating, but the king's brother leans back, eyes narrowed. You have no proof, but you'd swear he counted every second the child was gone. Music swells again as dancers take the floor. Their steps are graceful, but there's tension in them, as though even the dance is a weapon. You watch as one of the conspirators from the tapestry room crosses the floor to speak with a foreign envoy. Their conversation is short, but whatever is said makes the envoy pale and nod quickly. Deals are being struck, or perhaps threats. When the banquet finally winds down, the courtiers stagger out into the cool night air, but no one looks relaxed. You stay behind a moment, watching the servants clear the tables. One of them, perhaps thinking no one is listening, mutters a rhyme under his breath about false princes and stolen crowns. It's an old nursery song, one you remember hearing as a child. You never knew until tonight how sharp its edges were. As you step into the courtyard, the moon is high, and the stars seem to glitter more fiercely than usual. You imagine the astrologer locked in his chambers, unable to see them, and wonder what he would make of their alignment tonight. Perhaps he would say that the heavens themselves are watching, holding their breath along with the rest of the realm. You catch sight of the queen being helped into her litter, the child in her arms. For just a second her eyes meet yours, and there's something like a challenge there, as though she's daring you to speak the truth. Then the curtain falls, the litter sways away, and you're left standing in the torchlit courtyard with a chill creeping up your spine. Back in your chamber, the smell of roast meat still clings to your clothes, but you can't shake the taste of fear. You set the bone bead on the table beside the moon and sword parchment, the two tokens staring up at you like silent witnesses. The secret feels heavier tonight, as though the entire palace pressed its weight onto your chest during the feast. When sleep finally comes, it brings a dream of the great hall transformed into a battlefield. The tables are overturned, the banners shredded, the cradle lying on its side in a pool of spilled wine. The king's brother stands in the centre, crown in hand, while the queen kneels beside the child, holding her close. You wake just before the brother places the crown on his own head, the echo of war drums still pounding in your ears. The dawn after the banquet feels sharper, like the air itself is watching you. The palace is quieter than usual. No loud laughter from hungover nobles, no music drifting through the halls. Even the servants seem to move more softly, as though afraid to disturb whatever tension is coiled around the court. You decide it's the perfect time to explore places you've been warned not to explore. You make your way toward the king's private library, a place most courtiers treat as sacred. It's not the grand hall where public charters are displayed. This is the quiet room where state secrets go to nap between crises. You slip in through a side door just after a clerk leaves, your heart thudding as the latch clicks shut behind you. The smell of leather, dust and beeswax is so thick it nearly feels like a presence. The shelves climb to the ceiling, stuffed with scrolls and ledgers, but it's the locked iron coffer near the writing desk that catches your eye. You've seen the Chancellor carry its key like a relic, and you've seen guards posted outside the room during council meetings. Whatever's inside must matter more than gold. You crouch to inspect it, and to your surprise the lid is not fully latched. Perhaps the clerk was careless in his haste, or perhaps fate has decided you've earned a glimpse of what lies inside. You lift the lid slowly, praying it won't creak, and find bundles of parchment tied with crimson ribbon. Some are marked with the royal seal, but others bear strange stamps. Foreign coats of arms, merchant guild crests, even the private cipher marks of ambassadors. You untie the first bundle, careful not to break the wax. The letters inside are written in a hand that is not the king's and not the queen's, but one you recognise from the tapestry room, the Chancellor. They're diplomatic reports, and their contents make your stomach turn. One letter to a neighbouring kingdom refers obliquely to the questionable circumstances of the heir's birth, and suggests that if war should ever break out, their crown might find it advantageous to remind the realm of its true line of succession. Another letter, this one from a foreign envoy, congratulates the court on the clever resolution of the unfortunate stillbirth. The wording is maddeningly polite, but the implication is clear. Foreign powers know about the swap, or at least suspect it, and they're willing to play along as long as it benefits them. You dig deeper into the coffer and find one letter that feels colder than the rest. It is unsigned, written in a rough hand, and its message is blunt. We know the child is not the king's blood. Deliver the grain shipment as promised, or we will tell the world. You stare at the words until they blur. Extortion, right in the heart of the royal archives. Historians love to speculate about moments like this, wondering whether monarchies truly lived at the mercy of blackmail, or whether such threats were just diplomatic theatre. Standing there with the letter in your hand, you can tell this one was no bluff. There's too much desperation in the phrasing, too much risk in committing such a claim to ink. A sound in the corridor snaps you out of your thoughts, the scrape of boots on stone. You quickly retie the bundle and lower the lid of the coffer just as the door creaks open. A young clerk pokes his head in, glances around and mumbles something about needing ink. He doesn't seem to notice you standing stiff as a pillar in the corner. When he leaves again, you let out a breath you didn't know you were holding. You stay just long enough to scan the desk where one fresh letter lies half-written. The ink is still wet, the lines carefully worded. A draft proclamation announcing that the child is healthy and legitimate, confirmed by sacred right. It hasn't been sealed yet, which means the court is still debating how loudly to proclaim what you know is a lie. You leave the library quietly, but the knowledge follows you like a shadow. Every noble you pass in the hall could be holding one of those letters close to their heart, ready to unsheath it like a dagger when the time comes. Later, while crossing the courtyard, you overhear two heralds gossiping about a messenger who never returned from the northern provinces. Some say his pouch contained a letter meant to reassure distant lords of the heir's legitimacy. Others whisper that he was intercepted by brigands who now hold those letters as leverage. You imagine those brigands sitting by a campfire, laughing at the thought of kings and queens dancing to their tune. That night, the court hosts a smaller supper for foreign dignitaries still in residence. You watch them closely, noting how they speak with honeyed courtesy, but measure every glance toward the cradle. The envoy from the east presents a gift of a golden rattle, and the queen accepts it with a smile that doesn't quite reach her eyes. When the king's brother raises a toast to the future of the realm, his gaze sweeps the table like a sword, daring anyone to contradict him. You can't shake the thought that these letters are more dangerous than any blade. A sword can kill one man, but a letter can unseat a dynasty. If the contents of that coffer became public, every alliance the kingdom relies on would tremble. You return to your chamber and spread out what you remember across the table. The foreign seals, the veiled threats, the congratulatory notes that reek of diplomatic smugness. You sketch the crescent and sword symbol in the corner, as though hoping it might line up with some hidden pattern. Instead, the page looks like a map of a war not yet fought, every line a potential front. Your dreams that night are restless. You dream of the coffer again, but this time when you open it, instead of letters you find a snake curled inside, its tongue flickering. It speaks in a voice that sounds like the Chancellor's. Secrets grow teeth if you feed them long enough. You wake with a start, the image still hissing in your mind. You know now that the letters won't stay in that coffer forever. Someone will use them, perhaps soon, and when they do, the palace will discover just how sharp written words can be. The following day brings more proof of shifting ground. The Chancellor announces a new treaty with the Western Duchies, smiling as though the deal is purely commercial, but you catch the subtle nod between him and the guard captain. Something has been promised behind closed doors: grain, coin, maybe even land, in exchange for silence about the cradle's secret. You catch yourself wondering what it must feel like for the Queen, holding the child in her arms while knowing her entire kingdom is bargaining over her head. Does she lie awake at night listening for footsteps in the hall, terrified that one of these letters will surface before the girl is old enough to defend herself? That evening you spot a small commotion by the palace gate. A courier has arrived from abroad, his horse foam-flecked, his cloak spattered with mud. He delivers a packet directly to the king's brother and vanishes before the guards can question him. The brother reads it under the torchlight, his mouth curling into something between a smile and a snarl. Whatever news he's just received, it has tilted the balance of power slightly in his favour. You return to your chamber with the uneasy sense that the game is quickening. The letters you saw were only the beginning, the opening moves in a dangerous contest. You place the bone bead, the parchment, and now a rough sketch of the coffer on the table together, the 3 pieces of your growing puzzle. Together, they tell a story that could topple the throne. Outside your window the wind picks up, carrying with it the sound of distant bells. Alarm bells, perhaps, or just the call to late prayers. Either way, you can't shake the feeling that the next message to arrive at court will not be so polite, and that the secret you've been carrying is about to become everyone's problem. The bells are still ringing in your ears the next morning, when you find yourself walking toward the abbey that sits just outside the palace gates. It's a place most courtiers visit only on feast days, but today you feel an urge to see the monks, men who write history in careful ink, whose quills have the power to outlive kings. The abbey smells of tallow and parchment, a dry, patient smell that makes your lungs ache after the perfumed air of the court. The scriptorium is dim despite the rising sun, lit only by rows of candles that drip wax like stalactites. You pause at the threshold, watching as the monks bend over their desks in silent rhythm, scratching ink onto parchment. The sound is oddly soothing, like rain on a roof. You approach one figure at the far end of the hall, a monk with narrow shoulders and ink-stained sleeves. He doesn't look up until your shadow crosses his desk. "Not supposed to be here," he murmurs, though his voice is more weary than stern. His quill hovers above the page for a moment before he finally sets it aside. "If you've come to see the birth ledgers, you'll need the abbot's leave." You slide a small coin across the desk, not enough to be considered a bribe, just enough to acknowledge the value of his time. He hesitates, then sighs and reaches for a leather-bound volume stacked to his right. The cover creaks as he opens it, revealing neat columns of names and dates written in a hand steady enough to make you jealous. He flips to the entry for the night you now know too well. Your pulse quickens when you see it. 2 names written on the same line, one carefully scratched out, the other written over top in darker ink. You run your finger just above the page, not daring to touch. The monk notices your stare. "Strange night, that one," he says, lowering his voice. "They sent for us twice, once to witness the birth, and again to swear we saw only one child." His expression is unreadable, but his next words send a chill down your spine. "I signed it, but I kept my own record as well." For my conscience, he rises, motions for you to follow him. You slip through a side door into a narrow room that smells of damp stone and candle smoke. There, hidden under a plank in the floor, is a second ledger. He lifts it with reverence as though it's a relic and opens to the same date. This time the page shows everything the official record erased. The stillborn prince listed by name, the servant girl's child listed beneath with a note in the margin, placed under royal protection. The words look simple, but you can almost feel the weight of the hand that wrote them. You ask him why he kept it, why he risked so much to write the truth. The monk's face is lined with candle soot, but his eyes gleam with something fierce. "Because I am not here to flatter kings," he says. "I am here to tell the story as it happened, so that when judgment comes, the record will be clear." Historians still dispute whether these secret ledgers were common practice, or whether they are merely legends invented to make later revelations seem more dramatic. But as you crouch beside that plank floor, smelling the dust of decades, you have no doubt this one is real. You copy the entry carefully onto a scrap of parchment, tucking it into your sleeve. The monk warns you to guard it well. "They will come looking for it," he says, "and for me." The crown does not like loose threads. As you leave the abbey, the sun is high, but the day feels colder somehow. You notice soldiers drilling in the yard, their shouts ringing too loud against the stone walls. One of them glances at you with a look too sharp to be casual, and you wonder if word has already spread that someone visited the monks today. Back at the palace, the corridors are alive with nervous energy. You pass a group of clerks carrying bundles of documents, their faces pale. Something has been discovered, perhaps one of those letters you saw, and now the court is scrambling. In the Queen's gallery, you catch sight of her speaking softly with the Chancellor. Their voices are too low to hear, but you can read the tension in the set of her shoulders. She cradles the child, rocking slowly, as though the motion might steady her own heart. That night you light a single candle and spread your growing collection of evidence across the table: the bone bead, the soot-marked parchment, the sketch of the coffer, and now the monk's copied entry. The candle throws long shadows that make them look like chess pieces on a board, each one poised to strike. You're still staring at them when you hear a sound outside your door, a soft shuffle, then silence. You snuff the candle and hold your breath. Someone slides a piece of paper under the door and retreats without knocking. When you unfold it, you find only 4 words again, the same hand as before: stop before it stops you. The message chills you more than the wind. You wonder who sent it: the noble from the tapestry room, the captain of the guard, or someone higher, someone who knows exactly how close you are to piecing the puzzle together. You barely sleep, and when you do, you dream of the monk's ledger glowing like a lantern in a cavern. But every time you reach for it, the pages turn to ash. Morning brings no relief. At breakfast, you overhear talk that the abbot has been summoned to the palace. The servants speculate that the crown wants a full accounting of the abbey's records. Your stomach sinks as you picture that hidden ledger being confiscated, locked away forever, or worse, burned. You make a choice then, one that feels dangerous even as you make it. You slip away from the meal, find a boy from the stables you trust, and press the copied entry into his hand. If I do not return by tomorrow, you tell him, ride to the next town and give this to the magistrate. Swear that you saw me write it. He nods, wide-eyed, and tucks it into his jerkin. You feel a strange sense of calm settle over you after that, as if you've shared the burden just enough to breathe again. That night, the wind howls around the turrets, rattling shutters and moaning through the corridors. You sit by the window, watching the moon slide out from behind clouds, and wonder if somewhere the monk is doing the same, listening for approaching boots. The palace feels poised on a knife's edge. One more revelation, one more whisper in the wrong ear, and everything could come crashing down. And yet you cannot shake the feeling that you are meant to see this through, that the truth, terrible as it may be, deserves to live somewhere beyond candlelit ledgers and locked coffers. When you finally fall asleep, you dream of ink pooling across a page, spelling out words you cannot read, and in the dream you dip your finger in the ink and write a single line of your own. She will reign, and the stars will not fall. You wake with a taste of ash in your mouth, the words still ringing in your ears. By the time the next festival arrives, the entire palace feels wound tight as a bowstring. You can hear the carpenters hammering in the tilt-yard before dawn, raising the stands and setting the colourful banners that promise a day of jousts, feasting and merriment. The king has ordered a grand tournament to celebrate his son's survival through the dangerous first year of life, and no one dares skip it. Celebration, after all, is its own kind of weapon. When you show the people enough splendour, they forget to ask questions. You take your place in the stands with the rest of the court, the wooden benches warm under the late summer sun. The smell of horse sweat and trampled grass mixes with roasting meat from the nearby stalls. Children wave pennants, squires run about tightening girths, and armoured knights look like glittering statues as they mount up. The king and queen sit in the shade of the royal pavilion, the prince cradled on a silk pillow between them, a living emblem of the day's cause for joy. The first jousts are thrilling enough to make you almost forget the ledger and the coffer and the threats. The lances shatter into splinters, cheers ring out, and the dust rises in golden clouds. You let yourself breathe, even laugh, until the king himself rises and announces that he will ride in the final match of the day. The cheer from the crowd is deafening, but you feel a cold bead of dread slide down your spine. The king may be in his prime, but jousts are dangerous even for the strongest. One slip of a horse, one lance striking a fraction too high, and the day of joy becomes a day of mourning. Historians often write of monarchs eager to prove their vigour by riding in tournaments, and some even paid for that bravado with their lives. Henry II of France comes to mind, struck through the eye by a splintered lance, dead within days. You can't help thinking of that as you watch the squires buckle the king into his armour, fastening the gilded helm over his head. His opponent is a young knight known more for speed than skill, a cousin of the Queen, whose place here might not be coincidence. Some say the Queen herself asked for him to ride, claiming it would bring honour to her house. You catch a look pass between them, something unspoken, maybe a warning. The trumpets sound and the riders lower their visors. The first pass is clean. Both lances glance off shields, scattering splinters but leaving both men upright. The crowd roars. The second pass is faster, more aggressive, the kind that makes the stands lean forward as one. This time the king's lance strikes true, but the younger knight's weapon hits higher than it should, glancing off the king's helm with a crack that makes you wince. For a moment everything slows, the king reeling in the saddle, the horse sidestepping, the spectators holding their breath. Then the inevitable happens. The king slips from the saddle, crashing to the ground with a sound you feel in your bones. The field erupts, squires run forward, the queen screams, the royal physicians push through the dust. You leap to your feet, straining to see past the crowd. The king is alive, thank heaven, but barely conscious, blood trickling from beneath the visor. They carry him from the field, his legs dragging, and the tournament is called off at once. The court is thrown into chaos. The prince is whisked away under heavy guard, as though danger might be contagious. In the confusion you manage to slip closer to the royal pavilion. From this angle you can see the queen's face, pale as milk, her lips moving in frantic prayer. You also catch sight of the king's brother, standing utterly still, his expression unreadable. You follow the procession back to the palace, the streets eerily silent despite the throngs lining the way. Everyone knows what it means if the king dies without a clear heir. The queen clutches the child so tightly you fear she'll leave bruises. Hours later the court gathers outside the king's chambers. The physicians come and go, faces grave. At last, near midnight, the king's brother emerges. His voice carries easily in the hushed hall. His Majesty lives. A collective breath is released. But he is not yet out of danger. You linger after most of the court disperses, and that's when you hear it. A low, hoarse voice from inside the chamber. You edge closer, just enough to catch the words. The king is delirious, half awake, murmuring to the queen. "They must know," he says, his breath rattling. "I could not save him." The boy, I saw his face. The queen hushes him, but he goes on. "We buried him in the crypt, told them it was God's will. But you brought her to me and said she was our salvation." You nearly stumble backward at the sound of it. Here is the confession from the king himself, spoken in fever. You back away before anyone sees you, your heart hammering. If the king recovers, will he still remember what he said? Or will this night vanish into the haze of illness, leaving only you with the knowledge? Outside, the rain begins to fall, turning the courtyard into a glistening mirror. You stand there a long time, letting it soak through your cloak, trying to calm the storm inside your own chest. When you finally return to your chamber, you find another note waiting under your door. This one is different from the others, more urgent, the ink smudged as if written in haste. "Meet me in the chapel before matins," it says. No signature. You lie awake until the bells begin to toll. The chapel is cold, lit only by a few guttering candles. You wait in the shadows until a figure slips in, one of the conspirators from the tapestry room. His face is drawn, his hands shaking. "You heard him," he says without preamble. Others did too. If the king dies tonight, there will be no stopping the brother. He will call the girl a fraud, put her mother aside, and claim the throne for himself. You ask what he intends to do, though you already suspect the answer. "We must swear loyalty to the child," he says grimly. "Publicly, before the court can fracture. But that means forging a document with the king's seal, whether he gives it willingly or not. The weight of the choice hangs between you like incense smoke. To fake such a document is treason. But to let the brother take the throne might mean years of bloodshed. Historians still argue whether such decisions were acts of noble courage or naked power grabs. Perhaps they were both. Standing there in the cold chapel, you understand how men justify dangerous choices when the alternative is civil war. When you return to your chamber, the sky is paling. The king is still alive, barely, but by nightfall no one will trust that he can rule. The palace is about to become a chessboard, and every player will make their move. You glance once more at your growing collection of secrets. The bead, the parchment, the copied ledger, each piece feels heavier than it did yesterday, as though preparing to tip the scales. And somewhere in the back of your mind you hear the faint clatter of hooves on the tilt-yard, the moment of the king's fall replaying itself like a warning. If this was fate, you think grimly, then fate has a taste for spectacle. By the time the king's fever begins to break, the palace has already changed. The corridors feel narrower, the guards more watchful, as though the walls themselves have tightened their grip. The queen is no longer seen walking freely through the gardens or presiding over the hall. Instead, she is advised to rest in the solar wing, a place that might look serene with its tall windows and embroidered cushions. But you know a gilded cage when you see one. You catch your first glimpse of her new routine 2 days later. She's seated by a window, pale as the curtains around her, the prince in her lap. A pair of ladies-in-waiting hover nearby, their chatter forced and bright, as though to mask the tension in the air. Outside her chamber stand 2 guards who never used to be there. Their spears cross like an iron warning. The court whispers that this is merely for her protection, while the king recovers, but you can read between the lines. The brother's hand is all over this arrangement. He has moved her just enough out of sight to keep her from interfering, but not so far as to make it look like imprisonment. This is power in its most refined form, subtle, polite, and absolute. You managed to slip into the solar one afternoon under the pretense of delivering a petition. The room is flooded with golden light, the air smelling of rosewater and beeswax. The queen looks up at you with a smile that doesn't reach her eyes. You notice how tightly she holds the child, as though expecting someone to snatch her away at any moment. "You've heard the rumours," she says softly once the ladies step aside. "They say I am mad with grief, that I must be kept quiet lest I disturb the king's peace." Her voice hardens. "But I am not mad. I am furious." She gestures to the cradle and lowers her voice further. "They will call her illegitimate before she can even walk. They will say she's no daughter of the king, and they will not stop there. They will try to erase her entirely. I have seen it before. Her words remind you of the monk's ledger, of the scratched-out name. Erasure is the easiest weapon a crown can wield. You tell her in careful terms that there are still records that speak the truth, that not everyone in this palace is willing to rewrite history." For a moment her mask cracks, and you glimpse the weary mother behind the queen. "You're braver than the rest," she says, "or more foolish." She presses something into your hand, a ring, heavy and warm from her skin. "Keep this safe. If anything happens to me, give it to the child when she is grown. Tell her who she is." The gravity of the gesture nearly takes your breath away. You bow and slip the ring into your sleeve before leaving, heart hammering. Outside, one of the guards gives you a long, suspicious look. You walk away calmly, but the back of your neck prickles all the way down the corridor. That night you hear a strange sound. The queen's voice drifting through the hall, not in speech, but in song. She's singing a lullaby, one so old you can barely catch the words, but its melody is haunting. The sound is cut short by the heavy tread of boots and the clink of keys, someone locking the solar door for the night. The thought of her behind that door, with the moonlight slanting in like prison bars, keeps you awake until dawn. The next day brings a small scandal that ripples through the palace. A letter arrives from a foreign court, addressed not to the king but to his brother, offering support in the event of a disputed succession. The timing is too perfect to be coincidence. The brother receives it with an expression of saintly patience, but you see the gleam in his eyes. He's building a case, stone by stone, until no one will dare oppose him. Historians still argue whether queens in situations like this were truly powerless, or whether they wielded influence from behind closed doors. Watching her now, you suspect it's both. She is caged, yes, but her silence feels dangerous, like an arrow drawn back on the string. You begin to notice other changes. The queen's allies in court are quietly reassigned, one sent to oversee distant lands, another given a pilgrimage as penance for some minor slight. Even the new nursemaid seems to have been chosen for her loyalty not to the queen, but to the council. When she rocks the child, she does so with her face turned toward the guards, as though seeking their approval. One evening you catch sight of the queen standing by her window, staring out at the courtyard. The sunset paints her in firelight, and for a moment she looks like an icon, a figure in a stained glass window. Her lips move as though she is speaking to someone beyond the walls. You wonder if she's praying for deliverance, or plotting it. Later that night, a page you trust slips you a note. It is written in the queen's own hand. "Come to me after Compline. Bring no one." You go, of course, slipping past the guards with the help of a bribe and a well-timed distraction. Inside, the solar is lit only by a single candle. The queen is standing, the child asleep in her cradle. She hands you a small packet sealed with her signet. "If they take me away," she says, "hide this where they cannot find it. It holds the proof they fear most. You don't ask what's inside. The weight of it is enough. You promise her you will keep it safe, and she nods once before turning back to the cradle, her face hidden in shadow. When you leave, the corridor feels colder, the torchlight dimmer. You know you've just crossed a line. Whatever happens now, you're no longer just a witness. You are a participant. That night your dreams are filled with the image of the Queen's ring, gleaming like an ember in the dark. You dream of the solar door bursting open, soldiers flooding in, and the Queen holding the child high, as if offering her to the moon. You wake with your heart racing, the taste of iron in your mouth. In the days that follow, you notice that the guards outside the solar have doubled. The Queen is seen even less often, and when she does appear, her face is serene to the point of being eerie. Some whisper that she has accepted her fate, that she has given up the fight. You know better. There is a storm gathering behind those calm eyes, and when it breaks, it will not be quiet. You polish the ring every night, as if to keep its memory warm. The packet she gave you stays hidden under a loose floorboard in your chamber, but you check it twice a day to be sure it hasn't been discovered. Each time you pass the solar, you glance toward the window, half hoping to see her watching. Sometimes you do, and when your eyes meet, it feels like a silent oath is renewed between you. You will keep the secret until you can no longer keep it, and then you will make sure the right person hears it. Outside, the leaves are beginning to turn, the air crisp with the promise of autumn. The harvest will soon be gathered, the winter stores filled, and if the court has its way, the Queen will still be in that room come spring. You can only hope she endures that long. The first frost of autumn turns the gardens white, the grass crunching underfoot like brittle paper. You are walking near the cloisters just after dawn, enjoying the rare quiet before the court wakes, when a flicker of movement catches your eye. At first, you think it's a monk returning from prayer, the hooded figure gliding between the columns. But then you notice the gait, too quick, too purposeful, and the glint of steel under the cloak. You follow, keeping to the shadows. The figure moves toward the west wing where the new nursemaid keeps the child. Your stomach knots. You slip behind a pillar just in time to see the midwife, the one who confessed everything to you, step into the walkway from the opposite end. She looks thinner than you remember, her face hollow but determined. The cloisters are silent except for the distant drip of rainwater from the eaves. You see the midwife pause, perhaps sensing she's being watched. Before she can react, the hooded figure is on her, grabbing her wrist. The knife flashes once in the pale light. You lunge forward, shouting, and the assassin startles just enough for the blow to glance rather than strike deep. The midwife stumbles back, clutching her arm. The figure bolts, vanishing into the garden with a speed that leaves you breathless. You kneel beside the midwife. The cut is not mortal, but she is bleeding. She grips your sleeve with surprising strength. "I knew they would send someone," she gasps. "Listen to me. If I die, the ledger, the names, they are hidden under the altar stone in the chapel crypt. Don't let them destroy it. You promise her you'll find it, though your voice trembles. You help her to the infirmary, where the brothers bind her wound. But before you can leave, a pair of guards arrives, summoned by someone you did not see. They look at the midwife with cold suspicion and say she's to be taken for questioning about slander against the crown. You protest, but they wave you aside. She meets your eyes as they drag her away, her expression calm, almost resigned. You realise with a sick feeling that you may never see her again. The court is abuzz by midday. Some claim the midwife tried to harm the child herself. Others whisper that she was silenced for knowing too much. The Queen is said to have pleaded for her release, but the council overruled her. She's confined in the dungeons until further notice. That night you sneak into the cloisters again, retracing the steps of the morning. The moon is high, throwing the arches into dramatic silhouettes. You find a drop of dried blood on the stone, dark against the pale frost, and kneel there a moment in silence. Then you make your way to the chapel crypt. The door is locked, but you know where the sacristan hides the spare key. The crypt smells of stone dust and candle smoke, a place where the air feels heavy with the prayers of centuries. You find the altar stone she spoke of and pry it loose with a trembling hand. Inside is a small leather pouch. You open it to find scraps of parchment, each one recording names, times, witnesses, the entire story of that night in writing. Your breath catches. This is not just a secret. This is evidence strong enough to stand in any court. You tuck it under your cloak and replace the stone, making sure it looks undisturbed. Historians still argue whether conspiracies like this were ever so meticulously documented, but your fingers are smudged with dust and ink, proof enough for you. When you leave the crypt, the wind outside has risen, tearing at your cloak. The palace lights flicker like watchful eyes. You know that if anyone discovers what you have just taken, you will share the midwife's fate, or worse. Back in your chamber, you lay out the parchments alongside the ring and the Queen's sealed packet. Together they form a dangerous chorus, each piece singing the same truth. The child is not who the court says she is. And yet somehow, you feel more protective of her than ever. You barely sleep. The dream comes quickly, vivid as daylight. The cloisters are full of shadowy figures, their knives flashing like stars. The midwife stands in the centre, her hands raised in warning, and behind her the child toddles forward, her small hands reaching for you. You wake with a start, heart pounding, and for a moment you think you hear someone breathing just outside your door. You leap to your feet, fling it open, but the corridor is empty. Only a draught moves through the hall, smelling of iron and candle smoke. You close the door again, bolting it this time. At dawn you learn that the midwife has died in her cell. The official story is that she took her own life, but the servants whisper of bruises that did not come from a rope. The Queen does not appear at morning prayers. By evening, black cloth has been hung in the chapel for mourning, though no one dares say whose soul it honours. You attend the vigil anyway, standing at the back. The monks chant softly, their voices weaving through the air like smoke. You think of the ledger, now safe in your possession, and vow to keep her testimony alive. As you leave, you pass the king's brother in the aisle. He stops just long enough to let you see the satisfaction in his face. "A pity about the midwife," he says smoothly, "but some voices were never meant to carry." You say nothing, but your hand tightens on the hidden pouch until your nails dig into your palm. That night, the Queen sends for you in secret. You find her in the solar, her face pale but her eyes burning. "They killed her," she says flatly. "They will not stop there. You must get the truth out before they come for me." You hesitate, torn between fear and duty. But then the child stirs in her cradle, murmuring softly, and you know the Queen is right. The time for watching is ending. The time for acting is coming. You leave the solar with the packet pressed tight against your chest. The corridors seem darker tonight, the shadows longer. Somewhere in the distance a dog howls. You whisper to yourself as you walk back to your chamber, "I will not let them erase her." The words feel like an oath, one that might cost you everything. The next morning the entire court is summoned to the Parliament Hall, a rare event that sets every tongue wagging before the sun has even cleared the eastern wall. You make your way there with the rest of the palace inhabitants, boots echoing on the flagstones, the air heavy with anticipation. It's the kind of day that feels charged, like the sky right before a storm splits open. The hall itself is a cavern of authority, vaulted ceiling, banners of past victories hanging limp, and a dais at the far end where the king's throne stands empty. He is still confined to his bed. Instead, the Chancellor presides from a lower chair, his robes lined with fur as though to remind everyone of the weight of his office. The Queen is seated nearby, flanked by her ladies, and by guards whose spears seem more like bars than protection. The hall fills slowly, the nobles arriving in clusters, their cloaks damp from the morning mist. The king's brother enters last, striding down the centre aisle with deliberate slowness, every step loud enough to make conversation falter. When he takes his place, you can feel the air grow tenser, as though the room itself is bracing. The Chancellor rises and begins with a recitation of the kingdom's recent trials, the king's injury, the unrest in the countryside, the rising grain prices. His words are meant to soothe, but they fall heavy like wet cloth. Then he turns to the matter everyone has been waiting for, the future of the succession. He speaks of the need for unity, of ensuring that no rumour can threaten the peace of the realm. But the king's brother cuts him off with a voice sharp as a lance. "Rumour?" he says, his gaze sweeping the room. "Is it rumour to question whether this child is the rightful heir? Is it treason to demand proof before we place a crown on her head?" The hall erupts, some shouting agreement, others hissing in outrage. The The Queen rises, clutching the arms of her chair. Her voice cuts through the noise like a bell. "You would question my honour in front of the entire court?" The brother bows, but the gesture is mocking. "Not your honour, your grace. Only your fortune. We all know heaven's will is not always merciful." The uproar swells again. Fists pound the benches. Voices clash like swords. You press yourself back against a column, watching as the room turns into a storm of argument. One noble calls for an inquiry into the child's birth. Another demands her immediate recognition as heir. The sound is so loud it drowns out the thunder outside until the thunder answers, booming through the hall and making the banners shudder. Historians still debate whether storms at moments like this were seen as divine approval or condemnation. Today, standing there with the rain slashing against the high windows, you cannot help but feel the sky has chosen sides. At last the Chancellor slams his staff against the floor, calling for silence. "We will not turn this hall into a riot," he declares. "The king lives, and his word is law. When he wakes, he will settle this matter himself." The brother smiles thinly. "If he wakes," he murmurs, just loud enough for those nearest to hear. You watch the Queen's face pale, but she does not speak again. She sits, her back rigid, her hand covering the child's tiny fist. The hall eventually empties, but the arguments continue in the corridors, in the courtyards, even in the kitchens. By evening, the whole palace is split into factions. Those who support the Queen, those who whisper that the brother should rule, and those who simply wait to see which side wins. You slip away to the crypt once more, just to reassure yourself that the ledger is still safe. The stone is cold under your fingers, but when you lift it slightly, you feel the leather pouch still there, hidden from prying eyes. It comforts you, though it also reminds you of how precarious your position has become. Later that night, lightning rips the sky apart and plunges the hall into darkness when the torches gutter. You find yourself running through the corridors with a single candle, hearing distant voices raised in argument. You duck into a side passage and almost collide with a pair of servants whispering fiercely. One of them says the brother is preparing to summon troops loyal to him if the king does not recover by week's end. The rain keeps pounding, soaking the palace courtyard until it gleams like black glass. You stand at the window, watching as a lone rider gallops through the storm, his cloak plastered to his back. He carries a sealed message case, and you know without being told that its contents could tilt the balance of the entire realm. The next morning the hall is called again, though fewer dare to speak. The storm has broken, leaving the air damp and smelling of wet stone. The Chancellor announces that the king's fever has lessened, but he is too weak to attend. The Queen rises and calls for prayers, her voice steady but her hands trembling slightly. Then, to everyone's shock, the brother stands and lays a parchment on the table. "This is a petition," he says, "signed by half the lords of the northern provinces, demanding proof of the heir's birth before they swear their oaths. If that proof is not given, they will withhold their levies." The hall erupts again, but this time it feels less like argument and more like the first rumble of war. You watch as the Queen's gaze sweeps the room, fierce and unblinking. "Then they will have their proof," she says at last. "When the king is strong enough to speak, he will name his heir before God and the court." The brother bows again, but there is triumph in the curve of his mouth. He knows that every day the king remains too weak to appear, his own power grows. That night you cannot sleep. You sit at your table, the Queen's ring on one side, the parchments on the other, and wonder how long you can keep playing messenger between truth and survival. Outside, the rain begins again, softer this time, like a lullaby. But you know better. This storm is only pausing to gather its strength. When you finally drift off, you dream of the Parliament Hall filled not with nobles but with water, rising higher and higher until it reaches the throne. The child floats in her cradle like a tiny boat, while the brother stands dry on the dais, holding a sword that gleams like lightning. You wake with your breath caught in your throat, unable to shake the image. The hall may have emptied for now, but you can feel its echo in your bones. The storm has not passed, it is simply waiting for the next crack of thunder. The storm passes at last, leaving the air too clear, too sharp, as though the world has been scrubbed for the next act. The morning after Parliament's shouting match, a new arrival rides through the palace gates. A tall young man with the unmistakable posture of someone who knows his entrance is a performance. He wears no royal colours, yet there's something in his bearing. Head held high, smile just crooked enough. that makes the watching courtiers murmur before they even know his name. He announces himself at the guardhouse as Thomas of Berith, but the rumour leaps faster than he can walk across the courtyard. He claims to be the king's lost son. Not the stillborn prince. No, a son from years earlier, born in secret and spirited away to protect him from a plague that had swept through the city. Some laugh outright at the story. Others lean in, whispering. For every person who scoffs, 2 more look, as though they desperately want to believe him. You watch from the gallery as he's led before the council. He bows just deeply enough to be polite, but not so deeply as to seem submissive. "I have come to reclaim my place," he says simply, and the silence that follows is long enough to hear the hearth crackle. The Chancellor questions him closely. What wet nurse fed him? Which tutor taught him Latin? Which ring the king wore on his right hand the day of his supposed birth? To your surprise, the young man answers each question with unnerving accuracy. Either he has done his homework, or there is something to his story. The Queen sits stiffly, her fingers white on the arms of her chair. She does not speak once during the interrogation, but you notice how her gaze keeps darting to the cradle, as though to reassure herself that the child is still there. The king's brother, on the other hand, looks like a man savouring an unexpected gift. When the questioning ends, the council adjourns to deliberate, but no one leaves the hall. Instead, they cluster in knots, voices buzzing like hornets. You slip closer to hear fragments of conversation. If he is real, the girl has no claim. But the king never spoke of such a son. Would we rather a man grown or a child on the throne? Historians still argue about pretenders like this, whether they were clever impostors exploiting public doubt or genuine claimants who had been hidden for political convenience. In this moment, you find yourself teetering between the 2 explanations. There's a confidence in his voice that feels less like invention and more like memory. Later, in the courtyard, you cross paths with him by chance. He smiles at you, that same infuriatingly calm smile, and for a moment you feel as if he sees straight through you. "You've been carrying secrets," he says softly, as though stating a fact. "You must know that what I say is true." You bristle, asking how he could possibly know such a thing. He just shrugs. "Because I remember the cradle. And I remember the night my mother wept as they took me away." The words strike too close to your own memory of the midwife's confession. You leave quickly, but his smile follows you all the way back to your chamber. That night the palace feels alive with gossip. Servants whisper in corners, scribes stay up late copying records, and soldiers drill by torchlight as though preparing for trouble. You sit at your table staring at the Queen's ring and the packet she gave you, wondering if this pretender could be the solution, or just another spark that will ignite the powder keg. The next day a hearing is called in the Great Hall. The pretender is brought forth again, this time in full view of the court. He kneels before the Queen, but she does not rise. "If you are truly of my blood," she says, her voice steady, "prove it. Tell me the lullaby I sang to my firstborn." The hall holds its breath. Slowly he begins to hum a tune. It's hauntingly familiar. You recognise it as the same one you heard through the solar door when the Queen sang to the prince. The Queen's face goes white, then flushes crimson. She rises abruptly and sweeps from the hall without a word. The effect is electric. Half the court looks ready to kneel before the young man on the spot. The other half look ready to draw swords. The Chancellor calls for calm, but the noise is deafening, the hall echoing with shouts. You leave before the session ends, your head spinning. The child in the cradle may have been a secret shield for the Queen, but this man, real or false, has turned that shield into a blade. You imagine the brother smiling to himself, thinking how convenient it would be to set the 2 claimants against each other and sweep in when both sides are too tired to resist. That evening you wander into the cloisters for air. The stones are damp with rain, the air cool on your face. You sit on the bench where the midwife once sat and wonder what she would make of this twist. Would she see the pretender as a fraud, threatening to undo everything she risked her life to protect? Or would she say the truth cannot stay buried forever, even if it comes in the shape of a stranger? You hear footsteps approaching and tense, but it's only the Queen's most trusted lady in waiting. She sits beside you, her face unreadable. "He may not be lying," she says after a long silence, "but he is not the only one who remembers that night. Be careful whom you trust." She rises and leaves before you can ask more, her words leaving a chill in their wake. That night you dream of two cradles side by side, one holding the child, the other empty. The pretender stands over the empty one smiling, while the queen weeps silently. Then the cradles burst into flame, and the hall fills with smoke until you cannot breathe. You wake with your throat raw, the taste of ash sharp on your tongue. Outside, a cock crows, and you realise you've barely slept. By morning, the pretender has been given temporary lodgings in the palace. You see him walking the galleries as if he has lived there all his life, nodding to portraits of kings as though greeting family. The courtiers fall over themselves to offer him wine, to walk with him, to be seen on what they think may be the winning side. And yet, in the quiet of the night, you hear the queen singing again, her voice low but steady. The child sleeps soundly, unaware of the storm gathering around her. You think of the ring under your pillow, of the packet hidden beneath the floorboard, and you know you're running out of time to decide which truth to protect. The pretender's smile haunts you still. It is not the smile of a villain, but it is the smile of someone who knows he has just changed the game. The summons comes before sunrise, a single bell toll that echoes through the courtyard and makes you sit bolt upright in bed. By the time you reach the great hall, the palace is buzzing like a hive struck with a stick. The council has called an emergency tribunal to determine the pretender's claim, and with the king still too weak to appear, the outcome may rest on the votes of a handful of men whose loyalty shifts like sand. The hall has been stripped of its usual banners, leaving the stone walls bare and cold. Candles line the tables, their flames flickering in the draught from the high windows. At the far end, a long bench has been set up where the judges sit. The chancellor, two senior bishops, and three of the realm's oldest barons. Their faces look carved from the same oak as their seats. The pretender stands in the centre, unbound but flanked by guards. His posture is steady, his jaw set, but his eyes sweep the room with quiet calculation. The queen sits off to the side, veiled, her hands clasped so tightly the knuckles show through her skin. You notice she does not look at him once. The proceedings begin with a recitation of his claims, his birth in secret, his years of hiding, his miraculous return. Witnesses are called. An aging nurse who swears she saw the infant prince spirited away, a former tutor who claims to have taught the boy his first letters. Their testimonies ripple through the hall like wind through dry grass. Each one strengthens the case, yet each one leaves a shadow of doubt. Then the chancellor calls for proof, and you feel the entire court lean forward. The pretender produces a ring said to have belonged to the king's mother, engraved with the family crest. The queen's head jerks up at the sight of it, her lips parting as if to speak, but no sound emerges. The chancellor examines the ring, passes it to the bishops, and at last returns it to the young man. Historians still argue whether such rings could be forged, or whether the possession of one was enough to sway an entire court. Here you can feel the weight it carries. Murmurs sweep the benches, some nodding, some whispering darkly. The queen's turn comes next. She rises slowly, her veil casting her face into shadow. "My lords," she says, her voice steady, "this man may have been taught the lullabies I sang. He may wear the jewels of my house, but he is not my son." The hall explodes in shouts. Some cry out that she lies to protect her daughter. Others shout that she is the only one who would know the truth. The barons pound the table for silence, but the noise refuses to die until the chancellor threatens to clear the hall. At last, the judges withdraw to deliberate in a side chamber. The hall is left in a hush so deep you can hear the hiss of the candles. You find yourself pressed against the back wall, every muscle tight. It feels like hours before the door opens again. The chancellor steps out, his face unreadable. "We have not reached a verdict," he says. "Further inquiry is required. Until then, the claimant will remain under guard within the palace." The words fall like stones into a still pond. Neither side has won, neither side lost, and yet you can feel the room fracture further. The pretender smiles faintly, as if even delay is victory. The queen sinks back into her seat, and for a moment you think you see tears glint behind the veil. You slip away before the hall fully empties, your thoughts racing. If the tribunal could not decide today, what will change tomorrow? You think of the evidence hidden in your chamber, the ledger, the queen's packet, and wonder if revealing them now would tip the scales, but to do so would mean betraying the promise you made to the queen. That night, The palace feels haunted. You hear footsteps in the corridor outside your door, stopping just beyond the threshold. When you open it, no one is there, but a small scrap of parchment has been left behind. Choose soon. The handwriting is unfamiliar. Unable to sleep, you wander toward the crypt again. The air is damp, the torch is sputtering. As you kneel by the altar stone, you feel a presence behind you. Spinning around, you see the king's brother standing at the entrance, a torch in one hand. "So," he says softly, "you're the mouse that keeps finding the cheese." You freeze, the ledger still hidden beneath the stone. His expression is calm, almost amused. You've been busy, talking to monks, slipping through halls at night, listening where you should not listen. He steps closer, the torchlight throwing deep shadows across his face. "Tell me, do you think you serve the realm? Or only the queen?" You stammer something about loyalty to the crown, but he waves it away. Loyalty is a fine thing, but there will come a moment when you must choose between the truth and the kingdom's peace. Choose wrong, and blood will run in these corridors. He leaves as silently as he came, but his words stay with you, rattling in your head until dawn. The next day, the tribunal reconvenes, but this time behind closed doors. Only a handful of witnesses are admitted, and you are not one of them. You linger outside with the crowd, listening to the rise and fall of voices through the heavy door. After hours, the sound stops and the judges emerge again. "No decision today," the Chancellor says once more, but this time there is an edge to his voice. "We will meet again after the king has been consulted." The hall erupts again, some shouting in triumph, others in despair. The brother stalks out without a word, his cloak swirling behind him. The queen remains seated for a long moment, her hand on the cradle as though anchoring herself. You walk back to your chamber through corridors that seem darker than usual, every corner hiding potential betrayal. On your table, the queen's packet waits like a living thing, humming with its dangerous secret. You place the ring beside it, then add the parchments from the crypt, lining them up like evidence for a trial of your own. If the judges cannot decide, perhaps one day you will have to. And when that day comes, you suspect there will be no more shadows to hide in, only the harsh light of choice. When you finally fall asleep, you dream of the tribunal again, but this time the judges wear masks of bone and speak with voices like thunder. They point to you, not the pretender, and demand your verdict. You open your mouth, but no sound comes out. Only a single drop of blood falling to the stone floor, echoing like a gavel. You wake with the taste of copper on your tongue, certain that the next session will be the one that breaks the kingdom, or saves it. By the time the tribunal meets again, the king's condition has worsened. The physicians speak in cautious tones about lingering fevers and fragile humours, but the truth is plain. His grip on the crown is as weak as his pulse. The court no longer waits for his word. They circle like wolves, ready to anoint the next ruler whether his blessing comes or not. The announcement arrives at dawn. A formal ceremony of recognition is to be held that very evening, a proclamation naming the official heir and binding the lords to swear their fealty. But even the wording of the notice carries a sinister edge. It does not say which heir will be named. The palace erupts into a frenzy. Courtiers rush to choose sides, trading rings, seals, even hostages to ensure their safety no matter which claimant wins. You wander the galleries, the air smelling of oil and steel as guards polish their weapons. The prince has been dressed in a tiny ceremonial tunic, her dark hair bound with gold thread. She looks like a doll placed in a shrine, innocent to the fact that her future may be decided tonight. The great hall has never looked so bright or so deadly. Every torch is lit, every banner unfurled, and yet you can feel the weight of fear pressing down like a low ceiling. Soldiers line the walls, their pikes gleaming. This is no ordinary ceremony. This is a coronation at sword point. The Chancellor calls the court to order, his voice booming under the vaulted ceiling. The pretender is brought forth first, bowing with a confidence that borders on arrogance. He presents the ring once more, and this time the barons nod approvingly. Then the Queen steps forward, carrying the child in her arms. Her veil is gone, her face pale but fierce, as though she has decided that if she is to lose, she will lose standing tall. The Chancellor reads the royal decree, his voice shaking slightly. At first you think it will name the pretender, the words seem to bend in his favour, but then comes the twist. By the will of His Majesty, confirmed before the council, the Chancellor declares, the child known as the Prince Royal shall be recognised as heir and sovereign in waiting until such time as God calls her to reign. The hall is stunned into silence for a heartbeat, and then the uproar begins. The queen clutches the child to her chest, her jaw set. The pretender's face goes slack with shock, then tightens into a dangerous smile. The king's brother rises from his seat, his hand on the hilt of his sword. "You would crown a child who is no more royal than the cook's daughter," he shouts. His voice echoes like a cannon blast. The guards step forward, spears lowered, but the queen does not flinch. "You will kneel to her," she says quietly, "or you will kneel to no one, for this kingdom will burn before it bends to your ambition." For a moment, you're sure blood will spill on the dais. The soldiers stand poised, the nobles frozen. Then, slowly, the brother withdraws his hand from his sword and kneels, just enough to make it look like obedience, not surrender. Others follow one by one, until the hall is filled with the sound of knees striking stone. The chancellor leads the oath-taking. Each noble swears loyalty to the child, though some speak the words through gritted teeth. You notice which ones hesitate longest, which ones glance toward the brother before bowing their heads. This victory, you know, is only a pause in the war. Historians still puzzle over such moments, whether they mark the true securing of a dynasty or the beginning of its slow undoing. Standing there, you can feel that this is both, a triumph carved out under threat and a promise of battles yet to come. After the hall empties, you remain behind, staring at the dais. You can still feel the tension in the air like the echo of a storm. The queen approaches you, her child now asleep against her shoulder. "You kept your promise," she says softly. "The truth lived long enough to save her." You want to tell her that the war is far from over, that the pretender's smile as he left the hall looked less like defeat and more like a promise to return, but instead you bow and hand her the packet she entrusted to you. "Hide this somewhere safer than my floorboards," you say. "It may be needed again." She nods gravely and slips it into her sleeve. "You have done more for this crown than half the men who swore tonight," she tells you. "Do not think your part is over." That night the palace is restless. Songs of victory ring out from the kitchens, but you hear them muffled by the sound of boots patrolling the corridors. The brother is not done scheming, of that you are certain. In your chamber you spread out your relics one last time, the bone bead, the soot-stained parchment, the ledger scraps. Together they look like the bones of some strange creature, something that has stalked you for months but may finally have taken shape. You wonder whether to destroy them, to free yourself of their weight, but you cannot. History demands its witnesses, and you have become one. When sleep finally comes, it is deep and dreamless, the first true rest you have had in weeks. Yet even as you wake the next morning, the echoes of last night remain. The memory of the brother's hand on his sword, the pretender's narrowed eyes, the queen's defiant stance, they haunt the hallways like ghosts. As you walk through the courtyard, you notice the soldiers have not left their posts. The air still smells faintly of steel and sweat, as though the hall is holding its breath for another confrontation. You realise that what you witnessed was not the end of a story, but the hinge of it. The moment the door swung open to whatever comes next, and as you glance up at the battlements, you catch sight of the pretender watching you from the tower window, his smile as sharp as ever. The message in it is clear. Last night was only the first battle. The morning after the oath-taking dawns red, and you know before you even hear the clamour in the courtyard that something has broken loose beyond the walls. Smoke streaks the horizon, rising from the direction of the southern villages, and soon riders come pounding through the gates with news. Rebels have burned the tax house and hanged the royal bailiff from an oak tree. The coronation proclamation was barely read aloud in the provinces before swords were drawn. By midday the palace is an armed camp. Messengers gallop in and out, guards sprint down corridors, and the Chancellor is seen everywhere at once, barking orders to muster troops. The Queen keeps to her solo with the child, but you catch glimpses of her through the windows, pale, upright, as if carved from marble, refusing to let anyone see her falter. The king's brother is no longer subtle about his ambitions. He convenes a council of war and fills it with men loyal to him. "We must ride at once," he declares, slamming his fist on the map table. "Put down this treason before it spreads." The Chancellor hesitates. "We cannot risk leaving the capital unguarded while the pretender still resides within these walls." That remark sets off a heated debate that nearly comes to blows. One baron calls for the pretender's immediate execution. Another shouts that doing so would martyr him. You watch from the shadows, knowing this is what the brother wanted all along, a crisis to tilt the balance of fear in his favour. When the council finally disperses, you follow the sound of distant shouting to the outer bailey. There, you find a wagon of captured rebels, mud-splattered and defiant. One of them, a grizzled man with soot on his face, catches your eye and spits at the ground. "Your pretty palace won't stand forever," he growls. "We've seen the true heir." He walks among us. The words send a chill through you. If the rebels have taken up the Pretender's cause, the kingdom is in far greater danger than anyone here admits. Historians still argue whether rebellions like this were spontaneous uprisings of the hungry or carefully staged coups. Standing in that muddy bailey, watching these men grin even with ropes around their necks, you're convinced it's both. Hunger gave them cause, and politics gave them a banner. That night, you cannot stay in your chamber. The smoke outside turns the moon a sickly orange, and the smell of burning grain drifts through the shutters. You slip into the hall and find others awake, pacing like restless spirits. Somewhere deep within the palace, a baby cries, the future queen, voicing the fear everyone else is too proud to admit. By morning, the fires have spread closer, and you can see the glow from the highest tower. Refugees pour into the city gates, bringing tales of slaughter and of villages declaring allegiance to the rightful king. The Pretender, now under heavier guard, does not deny the rumours when confronted. He only smiles that maddening smile and says, "I told you the people would know me." The Queen orders additional prayers, the chapel filled with candles until it looks like a forest of light. You kneel with the rest of the court, the wax smell thick enough to choke you, and wonder whether the prayers are meant for the king's health, for the child's safety, or simply for the kingdom not to fall apart before winter. When the council reconvenes, the mood is darker. News has arrived that the rebels have taken a small fortress and raised their own banner over its walls. The brother pounds the table and demands permission to lead the army himself. After hours of debate, the chancellor agrees, provided the city garrison remains to guard the queen and the child. You watch as the brother rides out that very afternoon, armour gleaming, his banner snapping in the wind. Half the court cheers, the other half watches in silence, and you wonder if some are secretly hoping he will never return. Days pass with no word, only distant columns of smoke to mark where battles have been fought. The court grows more anxious with every sunset. Food stores are rationed, the gates barred at night, and the sound of the city outside becomes a low growl as fear turns to resentment. Then, one evening, a wounded rider staggers through the gates with news. The brother has taken the rebel stronghold, but at terrible cost. Villagers along the road were put to the torch and the rebels scattered into the hills, swearing vengeance. The next morning, carts of the dead arrive for burial. You see them lined up in the courtyard, peasants and soldiers alike, their faces grey with ash. The smell of smoke clings to their hair. The queen comes down to bless them, her veil wet with rain, and the sight makes even the hardest courtiers look away. That night, the city itself erupts. Rioters breach the market square, smashing stalls and shouting for bread. The garrison manages to drive them back, but the tension has turned into a live thing now, coiled and hissing. You hear rumours that the Pretender's guards have been doubled, not to protect him, but to keep him from escaping into the city where he might rally more support. Historians still debate whether these riots were truly about hunger, or whether they were stoked by agents of one faction or another. In the moment, you know it doesn't matter. The effect is the same. You spend the night in the gallery overlooking the courtyard, unable to sleep. Below, soldiers patrol with torches, their shadows dancing on the walls. The child sleeps somewhere behind those stone windows, oblivious to the danger gathering just beyond. You clutch the queen's ring in your hand and make a silent vow. Whatever happens, you will not let the girl fall into the hands of those who would use her as a pawn. When dawn breaks, the brother returns, weary but triumphant. His armour is dented, his horse blood-splattered, but his smile is sharp. The rebels are scattered, he announces to the court. The kingdom is safe. But you can see the cost in the haunted faces of the soldiers behind him, the way they glance at the queen and then away. Safe is not the word for what remains. This is a kingdom stitched together with smoke and fear. That night you dream of the fields beyond the city, burning red, and of the Pretender walking through the flames unharmed. Behind him, the child stands holding a crown too large for her head, her face unreadable. You wake with the taste of ashes in your mouth and the knowledge that this peace will not last. The victory celebrations begin before the last of the funeral carts have even left the courtyard. The brother insists on a masquerade ball to restore the people's faith in the court, though everyone knows it is just another display of power. Invitations are sent to every noble still within riding distance, and by evening the great hall is transformed into a glittering cage. Lanterns hang from gilded chains, throwing warm gold light over masks of velvet and feather. The air smells of spiced wine, roasting meat, and a tension so thick you could slice it with a dagger. You stand among the crowd, your own mask snug over your face, watching as rivals greet each other with smiles sharp as knives. The queen arrives last, carrying the child. Her mask is delicate, worked in silver filigree, but her eyes are cool and unreadable. The brother greets her with exaggerated courtesy, bowing low and pressing her hand to his lips, though his fingers linger just a fraction too long. The room exhales in unison when she steps past him unharmed. The music begins, lutes and rebecks weaving a dance tune that feels too cheerful for the atmosphere. Couples twirl across the floor, their masks glittering, their laughter brittle. You find yourself pressed against the wall, scanning faces for any sign of danger. That's when you notice the servants moving through the hall with trays of wine. One of them catches your eye, not for what he carries, but for how he carries himself. Too tall, too careful, his mask pulled low. You watch him approach the queen's table, your breath catching. He pours her a cup, then another for the lady beside her. The queen lifts the cup but does not drink. Her eyes flick toward you, just for an instant, and you see the recognition there. She knows something is wrong. She sets the cup down untouched. Moments later, a hound prowling under the table leaps up, knocks the goblet over, and licks the spilled wine from the rushes. The dog stiffens, shudders, and collapses. The hall freezes. The music stops mid-note, the dancers halting in place. The brother rises, his mask hiding nothing of his fury. "Find him!" he roars. Guards surge into the crowd, seizing the servant who struggles once before going limp. What follows is not a trial, but a spectacle. The servant is dragged into the centre of the hall, his mask torn away, revealing a face you recognise, one of the pretender's sympathisers from the captured rebels. Under torture he confesses that the wine was meant for the queen, and that the order came from those who wish the rightful king to sit the throne. The pretender is hauled from his quarters and thrown to his knees before the assembly. His mask is gone, but his defiance remains. "You think this proves my guilt?" he demands. "A desperate man poisons wine, and you hang the blame on me? You are cowards, afraid of the truth." The brother draws his sword, its tip gleaming in the torchlight. "Your truth has cost this realm enough." The Chancellor hesitates, torn between law and fear, but the crowd begins to shout for blood. The Queen steps forward, the child still in her arms. "Spare him," she says quietly. "The trial will show the people we are just." For a moment it seems the brother will refuse, but at last he lowers the sword and signals the guards. The pretender is dragged away to the dungeons, his face still twisted in a smile that looks more like a warning. Historians still argue whether that night's poisoning was truly his plot, or a scheme orchestrated by his enemies to discredit him. Standing there among the masked and trembling courtiers, you're not sure yourself. All you know is that the court has crossed a threshold. Mercy is now a gamble, not a virtue. The masquerade resumes after the prisoner is taken away, but the music sounds hollow, the dancing feverish. You slip out into the gallery for air, the cool night hitting your face like a blessing. Below you see the brother speaking quietly with the captain of the guard. Their silhouettes are sharp against the torchlight, and though you cannot hear the words, you know what they are planning. The pretender will not leave the dungeons alive unless someone intervenes. You spend the night pacing, torn between your oath to the Queen and your growing suspicion that killing him will only deepen the fracture in the kingdom. Just before dawn, you make your decision. You find the Queen in her solar, the child asleep in her cradle. He must not die, you tell her. If he does, his followers will rise in his name. Let him live long enough to stand trial, to show the people that justice is not just another word for vengeance. She studies you for a long time, then nods. "I will speak to the Chancellor," she says. "But if he dies before the trial, know this. There are those who will say it was my order." You leave her chamber with the uneasy knowledge that you may have just prolonged the kingdom's agony. That evening you sneak down to the dungeons. The air smells of mildew and rust, and your torch throws monstrous shadows on the walls. The pretender is chained but upright, his smile gone, replaced by something harder. "You think you've saved me," he says, "but every day I live is another day the people will remember me. And one day they will open these doors, not for justice, but for war." You say nothing, but his words follow you back up the stairs, echoing like the clank of his chains. When you return to your chamber, you find a single mask lying on your table, the one you wore at the ball. Someone has left it there, but the ribbon is cut clean through, as though with a blade. The message is unmistakable. You were seen, and you are now part of the game. Sleep eludes you. In your dreams, the ball never ends. The dancers whirl faster and faster until their masks fall away, revealing skulls grinning at you. In the centre, the queen and the pretender dance together, and the child sits on the throne, clapping her hands as though amused. You wake before dawn, heart racing, knowing the masquerade was not the end but the opening move of something darker. The day begins with an unnatural stillness, as though the palace itself knows this is the day everything will be decided. You rise before the bells and pace your chamber. The Queen's ring and the monk's ledger spread before you like a final hand of cards. Outside, the sky glows pale grey, the colour of cold steel. By mid-morning, the court assembles in the great hall for what is announced as the king's final proclamation. He has been carried from his bed, frail but awake, his face lined like parchment. The sight of him silences even the loudest whisperers. He grips the arms of his chair, every movement deliberate, and the hall leans forward as one. "My lords," he says, his voice thin but clear, "you have quarrelled and schemed in my absence, but today I speak as your king." He pauses, his gaze sweeping the room until it lands on the cradle. "This child is my heir. I name her sovereign after me, and I command that no man raise sword or whisper to dispute it." For a heartbeat, there is silence. Then the hall erupts. Some cheer, some shout in outrage, and the sound rises until it is nearly deafening. The brother leaps to his feet, face flushed, and begins to speak, but the king raises a single trembling hand, and the hall falls quiet again. "You have my command," the king says. "Obey it, or answer to me in this life and the next." The brother bows stiffly, his jaw tight, but you can see the fury burning in his eyes. The pretender is brought forth from the dungeon, chained but still unbowed. For a moment you think the king will order his execution then and there, but instead he declares, "This man shall live under guard until God himself judges between us. No more blood will be shed for this quarrel." Historians still debate whether this was mercy or strategy, whether the king hoped to keep both sides in check by holding the pretender alive as a living question mark. Whatever the reason, you feel the tension in the hall shift, not dissipate. The conflict has been delayed, not ended. That night, a storm rolls in from the sea, lashing the palace with rain. You cannot sleep, so you wander the galleries, the torches throwing long, leaping shadows. Near the crypt door you find the queen standing alone, her veil damp with mist. "It is done," she says softly when she sees you, "but we are not safe." Not yet. She presses the ring into your hand again, her fingers cold. "If anything happens to me, you know what to do." You nod, unable to speak. The weight of the ring feels heavier than it ever has, as if it carries the whole kingdom inside it. The storm rages through the night. You lie awake, listening to the wind batter the shutters, until you hear a sound that does not belong to the weather, the clang of steel, distant shouts, the unmistakable ring of boots on stone. You throw on your cloak and race into the corridor. The palace is chaos. A faction of soldiers loyal to the brother has tried to seize the nursery, but they are met by the queen's guards in a clash of steel and fury. You run toward the solar, your heart pounding. When you burst through the door, you find the queen standing over the cradle, a dagger in her hand. "They will not take her," she says, her voice calm, almost serene. Behind her, 2 guards lie unconscious, perhaps dead. You help her barricade the door just as more boots thunder down the corridor. What follows feels like hours, but can only be minutes. The crash of rams on the door, the shouts of loyalists and rebels, the clash of swords. You hold the cradle tight, the child staring up at you with wide, unblinking eyes. At last, the pounding stops. The Chancellor himself arrives with the king's seal, ordering the attackers to stand down. The brother is brought forward, his face spattered with rain. "I sought only to ensure her safety," he says, but no one believes him. By dawn, the hall is filled once more, the air smelling of sweat and blood. The king, carried in again despite his weakness, demands to know what happened. The brother kneels and swears his loyalty, but the king's gaze is cold. "You have tested heaven enough," he says. "Go into exile. You will not return while I live." The hall exhales in a single rush of breath. The brother bows, his face expressionless, but you know he's already thinking of the day the king's breath will cease. That night the queen sits beside the cradle, humming softly. The palace is quiet again, but it is the brittle quiet that comes after a storm, the kind that waits for the next thunderclap. You place the ledger, the parchments, and the ring in a chest and seal it with wax. You have done all you can for now. When you finally sleep, your dream is not of war but of spring. Green fields, the child grown, standing tall with a crown on her head. She does not look at you but past you, towards something beyond the horizon. For the first time, you feel hope stir in your chest. And so, as the sun rises on this fragile piece, you whisper a prayer to the empty hall, that when the next storm comes, she will be strong enough to weather it. The hall grows quieter in your mind as you let the final images settle. The torches dim, the smell of rain fades, and the sound of clashing steel becomes a distant echo. You imagine the palace at rest, its stones cooling under the dawn light, the queen rocking the child one last time before handing her over to the care of history. There will always be arguments about what was true, what was false, and who deserved the crown. There will always be chroniclers ready to smooth the story into something neater, something more flattering. But you know better. You were there when the secrets whispered through the cloisters, when the brother's blade nearly struck, when the king's voice broke the hall's silence. And perhaps that is enough for tonight. You breathe out slowly, letting the weight of the court's tension slip from your shoulders. The moon outside your window casts its pale light across the floor, and you imagine the child sleeping peacefully somewhere beyond those walls. The storm has passed, for now. The future will bring more battles, more reckonings, but that is for another day. So you close your eyes, letting the darkness become gentle. The torches go out one by one, the hall falls still, and the story folds itself away like a letter sealed for another generation. Rest now. The kingdom will keep.